From the staff of Fitchburg Access Television, welcome to another episode of North Central Journal, featuring the cities and towns, the people, and the events here in North Central Massachusetts. Hello and welcome again to North Central Journal. I'm Scott May, and our special guest for this show is Mark Bodanza. You may have heard of Mark. He's a lawyer. He's a city councilor in Leominster, historian, and author. We have you on today as the author, Mark Bodanza.
Author hat today.
And his new book, Johnny Appleseed, The Man Behind the Folklore. And I'm going to kick it off right away by saying you refer to Johnny Appleseed as, in the introduction, as the man, the myth, and the legend. So let's start with the man, John Chapman.
Well, thank you for having me, Scott. The man, John Chapman, was a real, live, breathing man. 42% of the country, by one poll, doesn't think that. They don't realize he really was a man. Born in Leominster in 1774, September 26th to be exact. Didn't live in the Leominster area a whole lot of his life, but spent his first years here, his first 6 years here. And then went to Longmeadow to be with his family. His mother died after childbirth for their third child while her husband was off in the Revolutionary Army. And we speculate, or I speculate in the book, that after his mother's death, John, the man, spent, or the child, spent till age 6 living with his maternal grandparents.
And the myth. What is the myth?
Well, you know, the myth was really in part, I think, created largely by Walt Disney in 1948 when he made a short film about Johnny Appleseed and created all sorts of folklore, if you will, about who Johnny Appleseed or John Chapman was. If you've never seen it, it's an endearing little film, and it really made him famous in some ways. I'm not sure that we would view Johnny Appleseed the way we do today if Walt Disney hadn't made that film in 1948. But it really was the ultimate PR for Johnny Appleseed or John Chapman. It changed the equation in many ways. So, you know, there's a thought that he was, you know, some type of eccentric that, you know, traveled around with a pot on his head and, planted apple trees everywhere he went and you know, was friendly with the animals and all sorts of, you know, idealistic notions. And a lot of that stuff is true,
yeah.
But there's a much more, as you can understand, there's a lot more texture to the story than that. And I thought when I wrote the book that I knew a fair amount about John Chapman being a local historian, but I realized quickly when I started my research that I really didn't know a whole lot about John Chapman, and found out, you know, a number of surprising things as to his travels and about the type of person he was.
Which gets us to that third piece, the legend. What is the legend?
The legend really is that he was the ultimate minimalist. I think that's what really comes across to me in his story, in his legacy. He didn't believe in doing anything or using anything more than was necessary to survive. He literally did dress with used clothing, sometimes coffee sacks with holes cut out for his head and his arms. Oftentimes he strapped on multiple pairs of pants that were worn out to cover himself. He was a devout vegetarian. He didn't believe in eating meat or harming animals. He did oftentimes go barefoot. There's a story about someone giving him a pair of shoes at one point, and he gave them away because he thought someone else needed them more.
Yes.
And the donor was upset with him over it. He wouldn't even graft an apple tree, which one of the things I learned about him and about apples in general is that even back in those days, and really for centuries before that, apple trees are propagated by grafting. The Chinese, as far back as 3000 BC, were grafting apple trees. An apple seed is like a little computer chip, it actually contains the potential to grow as many as 100 different varieties from that one seed. So if you plant the seed, you don't know what you're going to get. And to combat that, apple, orchardists would plant a generic rootstock and then get a branch from a known variety of apple and graft it. And that way there you knew the apple you were going to get. And that's what's done today. Johnny Appleseed wouldn't do that for two reasons. One, he thought it was hurting the tree. He was very much sensitive to hurting any living organism. And the other thing is that he believed it was messing with God's creation. Now, what you have to understand is back in those days, people didn't grow apples to eat them like we do today. Apples were largely grown to make apple cider, apple vinegar, those sorts of things were the utility, especially on the frontier for apples.
So we've covered the man, the myth, the legend. I'm going to add to that the stamp. So let's talk about the American Folklore series of commemorative stamps.
Well, as a young boy, I was interested in stamps, and I would sometimes get first day covers or stamps commemorative stamps when they're issued from the post office, plate blocks as they called them. And as a 10-year-old, I was delighted to learn that they were issuing a series of stamps which included Leominster's own Johnny Appleseed. In fact, in that 6-stamp series, it was number one. It was the first stamp that was issued. In September 24th, 1966, if I have that right. Ended up with some of the first day covers, and it definitely piqued my interest in history as well as John Chapman.
Now, following the years following his death in 1845, much was written about Chapman's heritage, but none of it included his birthplace of Leominster, Mass. How did history finally correct itself? How did that happen?
Well, that's an interesting story within a story. There were a number of women in a garden club out in Springfield who were interested in John Chapman's genealogy, and they wrote to the librarian in Leominster, Florence Wheeler, asking for her assistance. And Florence Wheeler was a really very crackerjack genealogist and historian, and she did a lot of work on it. The initial problem in tying Johnny to Leominster was there were a bunch of Nathaniels in his family line, and it seemed like everybody named their kids Nathaniel. In fact, Johnny had the brother that died was named Nathaniel, which is what led to his mother's passing as well. So Johnny's father was Nathaniel. His father was Nathaniel. Johnny's father died, or Johnny's grandfather died when his father was very young, and he sort of had a hand in selecting his own guardian, and that guardian was a fellow who wasn't named Nathaniel. I want to say his name was Davis, from memory, which was an odd name in the family line. That permitted Miss Wheeler to go back and look at the line and say, oh, that line is the one we're following to the guy that came from Tewksbury to Leominster. So she was able to put this all together and finally determine, positively that John Chapman of Leominster was the Johnny Appleseed.
Now, you mentioned his brother Nathaniel. Johnny goes west with his brother. Well, how, when, and where did that happen?
So there were two Nathaniels.
There were two, yes.
Yeah, the first one died, and then later on, when Johnny's father marries Lucy Cooley from Springfield, they have I think 10 more children, and one of them was Nathaniel.
So it's a half-brother.
Is a half-brother.
Half-brother, yep.
So somewhere around, there's speculation exactly when, but sometime around when John Chapman was about 20, he decides to go west with his younger brother, half-brother, Nathaniel, who we think was about 14 or 15 at the time. There's a lot of speculation about what route they took exactly, but there's one thing for sure that's known. He ends up in this Pennsylvania town because he bought a tool at the hardware store, and the tool was probably used for planting apple seeds. It was like an awl that you can dig, a little hole, drill a little hole into the ground with. And it was purchased by him, and that's how he's tied into that particular place in western Pennsylvania. And then he plants a nursery there for a short time. But between Longmeadow and that town in Pennsylvania, nobody really knows how he got from A to B. You could probably rest assured that the house that he was living in at the time he left, I think it's about 600 or 700 square feet. It still exists out in Longmeadow. It's a tiny little home, and there are a whole lot of people living in it.
Really?
Yeah, and you could probably guess that, at some point he just had to get out of there. and the prospects weren't good. His father was renting the house.
Right.
He was a subsistence type of farmer. The prospects in that right after the war for New England farmers weren't very great.
Now, what is the significance in the history of Johnny Appleseed of Broken Straw Creek?
If I remember right, that's where the first nursery was set up.
That's a test, and you just passed.
And he established a pattern really there, where it's probably doubtful that he even owned the land. He may have had permission to plant the trees there. He may not have, but it was meant to be temporary. So he planted the seeds and developed a number of seedlings. And of course, sold or gave away those seedlings once they were of the proper maturity, and then typically moved on. And he established that pattern for the rest of his life, eventually ending up in Indiana. He was always sort of staying with the edge of the frontier. And it kind of makes sense because those apple seedlings were something that the pioneers needed on the frontier, because those apples were a versatile crop for them, and satisfied a lot of needs, and that's where they were most needed. So where people were establishing great cultivations, better apple orchards, etc., he wasn't as needed anymore. So he had this nomadic style of life, and it starts with Broken Straw Creek.
And how did the Louisiana Purchase play into the history of Johnny Appleseed?
Well, I guess, probably because of the expansion west, and, the navigation of all those rivers. He has been thought to have gone south on some of those rivers. And in fact, the first guy that he befriended in Pennsylvania was running lumber back and forth through a series of rivers down towards New Orleans. And, the country was growing, and he was part of that pioneer adventure. And
he wanted to stay ahead of that growth west too, didn't he?
Yeah, he just needed to.
He didn't want to get caught up in it. He wanted to stay a little bit ahead of it.
Yeah. In fact, when the establishment came, and towns were really built up, he wasn't as needed, and he had probably a good marketing sense that it was time to find some more fertile ground, if I might use that expression.
Well, as he moved further west, he would enter into what you described as land lease agreements for the planting of his apple orchards. But he also purchased land, particularly in Indiana. And I'm just wondering, where did he come up with the money to purchase land?
Well, he was selling these seedlings. And I'm sure, there were instances where there were, stories that have come down where he helped people that were in extremis by donating seedlings to them. He doesn't come off as the most mercenary fellow in the world, but he also it wasn't completely a charitable adventure. He did own large swaths of land, and he did apparently make money selling seedlings enough to buy some of this land.
Yeah.
And was an entrepreneur in that regard.
Now, you talked about his wardrobe earlier, and it was a question I wanted to get to, but let's go back to that because it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
You mentioned he wore, what was it?
Coffee sack.
Coffee sacks.
Yeah.
And apparently he did have a pot on his head. And
Yeah.
that was for cooking, correct?
Yeah. At times he carried a mush pot for cooking.
Yeah.
At times they say he wore a hat with a large pasteboard visor, to keep the sun out of his eyes. So all of his clothing was pragmatic. It was either, the ultimate of squeezing the last bit out of the thread, if you will, or something that was completely pragmatic. He was just, like I said, the ultimate minimalist. He didn't want to use anything more than necessary to get by.
And he would be barefoot in conditions like winter weather.
It's a little hard to believe,
Yeah.
honestly, but there's contemporary talk about the amount of callus on his feet. He must have been something to look at. I mean, and I'm not suggesting, and I don't think anybody's ever suggested he was barefoot 100% of the time, but he was barefoot a lot. And yeah, that is a fact, I guess.
Now, in all your research, you said you learned a lot more about Johnny Appleseed than you thought you already had known.
Yeah, above and beyond the apple grafting, I think the whole religious part of him, as being sort of a missionary for the Swedenborgian church, which was noted. I mean, people in Philadelphia knew about his exploits as a missionary of that church. A fellow named Emanuel Swedenborg went to a London chop house one night and had a very sumptuous and large meal, and proceeded to get into some really heavy dreams. And he has said that the Lord's angels visited him and inspired him to write a Bible, which was multiple volumes. And that became the basis of his religion. Those Bibles were actually sent to be printed in America by a guy named Francis Bailey, who was pretty noteworthy guy in Philadelphia, had connections to a lot of the founders, including George Washington and Ben Franklin. So there were a lot of founder-type people who were actually have read Swedenborgian's works. Well, one of the people that took it up was Johnny. And he ingeniously would take the Bible and separate it into sections. And he would leave sections with families when he went to visit. And they'd go back and collect them and redistribute the next section, almost like a circulating library. And there's a lot of interesting stories about his, being tested about the tenets of this religion. And one of them, he was in a town square, and the Swedenborgians believed that, that heaven was like a literal place where you would have a home, and you would, with a bedroom and rooms, and that you would have a wife and a job and all the rest, just like you do here on Earth. And a lot of people have said that Johnny was unlucky in love, and that having a wife in heaven was something that he was working towards. But in one town square, I think it might have been Mansfield, someone asked him, "Do you have the same job in heaven that you have on earth?" And he said, "You would." And the fellow said, "Well, that's kind of funny because I'm a grave digger." And that got a big laugh from the assembled. And then the next guy said, "Well, I'm a lawyer. What would I do?" And he goes, "Oh, you guys don't go to heaven. You guys go to hell, where you are mired in mud up to your knees that you sling at each other for eternity."
What I found interesting is the fact that Johnny Chapman was born in September of 1774. He passed away in 1845. He was approaching his 71st birthday.
Yeah.
And for a guy who lived the life he lived, that was a pretty long life.
It was, and he was reportedly pretty healthy till the very end.
Yeah.
Really, it sounds like his last illness didn't last more than a couple of weeks. What it was, I don't think anybody really knows. He took sick, and he died in the cabin of one of the Worth families, last name Worth. And quite interestingly, somebody, tongue-in-cheek, had a campaign many years ago about bringing Johnny back to be buried in Leominster. The problem with that is I don't think anybody really knows where Johnny's buried because the Worth family had cabins on both sides of the river. So there was an assumption that he died on one side, but he could have very well died on the other side. So there's a monument out there in Fort Wayne to him and a little park, but no one really knows if he's really buried there.
What is the connection between Johnny Appleseed and Daniel Boone, the TV series?
None.
None. Okay.
Other than the fact,
Okay.
none that we know of, other than the fact that it was I went back and I used to be an ardent watcher of that TV series when I was a kid, and remember getting the Scholastic books on Daniel Boone in grade school, and I remember there being an episode that involved Johnny Appleseed. I went back and looked, and sure enough there was, and I write about it in the book. It is priceless because it's pure fantasy. But
Yeah.
Johnny Appleseed comes and, the opening scene, he ruins a shot at a deer because he's singing and making all kinds of noise as he's coming upon Daniel Boone and his young son, who's getting ready to line up a shot against the deer. And then he convinces them that, killing animals isn't the greatest thing in the world, and teaches them all sorts of moral lessons while he's in camp for a while. And it's a funny, it's interesting. It's pure fantasy, but interesting.
Now, this year marks the 250th anniversary of Johnny Appleseed's birth. What are the plans to celebrate that in Leominster?
We have some plans underway. We have a logo that we've created. We will issue a calendar later on in the year with events between September 15th and October 15th, noting this anniversary celebration. Mm-hmm. I know the library is planning a ball as part of it. There'll be extra events and attractions at the Johnny Appleseed Fair. The Historical Society is doing a exhibition which will not only cover Johnny Appleseed, but it will cover the bicentennial as well, because back in 1974, when we as a nation started to celebrate the bicentennial of the nation, Leominster celebrated the 200th anniversary of Johnny Appleseed's birth and actually won the first bicentennial award for the work they did on the Johnny Appleseed events. So we're going to combine the two things, and there's a lot of history that happened right around 1774. The formation of the First Continental Congress, and the committees of correspondence, and all the difficulties with the mother country that commenced in full bore in 1774. So we're going to tie a timeline into some of those events and show where Johnny fits into the picture in terms of his birth, his years in Leominster, and all of that. So that's one item. Mm-hmm. I am in the process of designing and having minted a special commemorative coin that we will sell for a modest amount to the public. The calendars, some of the calendars will have that 1966. We'll have an actual stamp from 1966 on them that we will postmark September 26th, 2024, with that special postmark. There's talk, we haven't totally got there yet, but there could be a parade, potentially. The schools are doing a bunch of programming. I will be giving some lectures on the book, and probably at the library and the Historical Society both. And there's some other surprise events that we'll have by that point.
And do you get the visitor center involved in some of this stuff too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there'll be a lot of people involved. It's a good community event. The mayor was once someplace talking about how to use tourism and your local sort of assets to promote your community. And for example, they said, if you have somebody like Johnny Appleseed, he goes, yeah, we got one of those here in Leominster. So yeah, it's great for local tourism.
Tell us about a little bit about Steve Ledger.
Oh, my illustrator, he is amazing. The first book he illustrated for me was a children's book that was the children's book version of a book I wrote called Resolve and Rescue, which is about the abolitionist from Leominster, Francis Drake, who was a towering figure in the abolition movement, and also courageous enough to be pushing gender and racial equality when gender equality was more radical than freeing slaves. Steve illustrated that book and did a great job on it. Got lots of accolades. And he was a little reticent about, his ability to do it. And I said, you have all the talent in the world to do this, believe me. And it's just great to see him blossom. And he did the cover of the Johnny Appleseed book, and many of his illustrations are spread throughout the book. People really love it. I get a lot of positive comments on it. Yeah. He's working on his own children's book now, involving Johnny Appleseed, and he's also working on illustrations for a book I'm writing about Disney and Benjamin Franklin.
Well, the next time we have you on for that book, we'll bring Steve on with you so we can
absolutely
have it. Love to meet him.
Yeah.
So what is next for Mark Bodanza? You mentioned that the book you're working on with Steve, but what else is going on with
Well, always a little bit of politics in the background.
you? Yeah, really.
I just got elected to the city council presidency, and in Leominster you can only serve a 2-year term. Unlike Fitchburg, we have a term limit.
Uh-huh.
So I served 4 years ago, was elected for a 2-year term, and now I'm serving a new term. So I got that going, and I'm running for the Republican State Committee. I got roped into that somehow, trying to make the party perhaps a little bit more moderate and a little bit more successful in Massachusetts, sort of the Charlie Baker style of Republican Party. That comes up on March 5th. Trying to practice law a little bit in between, I'm a commissioner for Doyle Field, one of the 3 commissioners, and also the chair of the Library Board of Trustees in Leominster. So it's a lot to do.
And your contributions here at FATV through FLAP, the FLAP TV show are appreciated too.
Love being here. Loved doing the commentary at the Thanksgiving Day game at Fenway Park. That was a little lopsided, and as a purist of the rivalry, you kind of hate to see that. There was a time in my life as a Leominster high school grad that I would have loved that, but not any longer. It's kind of funny as you dig into the history of it more and more, you become more of a rivalry purist. You want to see more competition,
Sure.
and I'm sure Fitchburg will come. If you look at the history, there's wild swings in both directions.
Yep.
I'm sure it'll go the other way.
The pendulum
someday.
goes back and
It
forth.
does.
It sure does.
It does. But the kids, I think, enjoyed that experience. I enjoyed it. I know that, and I love being here. I love doing the election coverage with Kevin. He does an amazing job. The staff here. Ian and Nate, they do a wonderful job. Robin, it's really fortunate to have this asset in this community.
Well, we thank you very much for, again, being part of North Central Journal, and congratulations. Johnny Appleseed, the man behind the Folklore.
Thank you, Scott.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you too.